The termination letter sat on the desk between them, crisp and final. Jack Miller stared at the signature at the bottom, Olivia Grant, Human Resources Director, the same woman he had argued with just last week over a scheduling conflict. Now her name ended his career 3 days before Christmas. He kept his face neutral as he walked out, folding the letter and tucking it behind his back when he reached the elementary school. Emily ran toward him through the falling snow, and he caught her in his arms, spinning her once before setting her down. Across the parking lot, Olivia Grant watched from her car, her expression shifting as she observed a father who looked nothing like the unstable troublemaker described in the report she had signed. Jack held Emily's mittened hand as they walked through the Christmas market in downtown Hartford, the smell of roasted chestnuts and pine garlands filling the cold December air. Strings of white lights crisscrossed overhead, casting a warm glow on the crowds moving between wooden vendor stalls. Emily tugged him toward a booth selling handmade ornaments, her breath visible in little clouds as she chattered about which one would look best on their small tree at home. Jack smiled and nodded at all the right moments, but his mind kept returning to the folded paper in his coat pocket, the weight of it pressing against his chest like something alive and malevolent. He had worked at Hartwell Manufacturing for 4 years. 4 years of arriving early and staying late, of covering shifts when others called in sick, of learning every machine on the floor until the supervisors trusted him with the most delicate repairs. He had built a reputation as someone reliable, someone who solved problems rather than creating them. And now it was over because of a report claiming he had threatened a coworker, falsified time records, and created a hostile work environment. None of it was true. But the signature on that letter belonged to someone with authority, and his word as a floor technician meant nothing against hers. Emily stopped at a booth selling hot chocolate, her eyes wide as she watched the vendor add a tower of whipped cream to a paper cup. Jack reached for his wallet automatically, then hesitated. He had $47 left until his final paycheck arrived, and rent was due in 8 days. The math did not work, no matter how many times he ran the numbers in his head. But Emily was looking up at him with such simple joy, such complete trust that her father would always make everything okay, that he handed over $4 without letting his expression change. She took a careful sip and immediately got whipped cream on her nose, giggling as Jack wiped it away with his thumb. For a moment, watching her laugh, he could almost forget that everything was falling apart. Almost. But the letter crinkled slightly when he shifted his weight, reminding him that pretending would not change reality. Across the market, Olivia Grant stood with 3 other managers from Hartwell, all of them holding mulled wine and laughing at something her colleague had said. She wore a camel coat and a burgundy scarf, her dark hair pulled back in a low knot that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. When she spotted Jack, her laughter faded. She watched him guide Emily between the crowds, his shoulders slightly hunched against the cold, his attention fixed entirely on his daughter with a tenderness that seemed at odds with everything she had read about him. Emily noticed her first. She waved enthusiastically, recognizing Olivia from the company family picnic last summer, where Jack had helped set up tables and Emily had won a prize in the sack race. Jack's jaw tightened, but before he could redirect Emily, the little girl was already calling out a cheerful greeting. Olivia raised her hand in a small wave, something uncertain flickering in her eyes as she took in the scene before her. Jack steered Emily away without acknowledging Olivia directly. He could not afford to make a scene. Not here. Not in front of his daughter. Whatever had happened at Hartwell, whatever injustice had been done to him, Emily would not be burdened with it. She was 7 years old. She still believed in Santa Claus and happy endings. He would carry this weight alone, the way he had carried everything since her mother died 3 years ago. Later that evening, after the market lights had dimmed and most families had gone home to warm houses and waiting dinners, Jack found himself at the loading dock behind the event venue. A catering company needed extra hands to break down the booths and load equipment into trucks. The pay was $20 an hour, cash, no questions asked. Jack pulled on work gloves and started lifting crates alongside men he had never met and would likely never see again, men with their own stories of desperation and survival. The work was hard, the kind of physical labor that left muscles aching and hands raw, even through gloves. But Jack welcomed the exhaustion. It gave his mind something to focus on besides the impossible situation waiting for him at home. $20 an hour for 4 hours meant $80, enough to push back the worst of his fears for another day or two. Olivia had stayed late to help her colleague find a lost scarf. Walking back to her car through the emptying streets, she passed the loading area and stopped when she recognized the figure hauling a heavy crate up a metal ramp. Jack Miller, still in the same coat he had worn to receive his termination letter, was doing manual labor in the freezing dark just hours after losing his job. She stood there longer than she should have, partially hidden by a parked delivery truck, watching him work without complaint. His movements were efficient despite obvious exhaustion. Each crate lifted and placed with the precision of someone who understood how to work hard without wasting energy. The report she had signed painted a picture of a volatile man who could not be trusted around equipment or colleagues. But the man she was watching now moved with the quiet determination of someone who had no other options and refused to give up anyway. Something cold settled in Olivia's stomach that had nothing to do with the December air. She thought about the report again, about the specific language used, about the signature she had added without questioning the details. Human Resources received dozens of incident reports every month. She could not personally verify each one, but standing there in the dark, watching Jack Miller work for $20 an hour to keep food on his daughter's table, she began to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. She did not approach him. What would she even say? Instead, she walked to her car and sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, the heater blowing warm air against her frozen fingers. Tomorrow, she would look at that report again. Tomorrow, she would ask questions she should have asked before signing anything. Tonight, she drove home with the image of a father and daughter walking through the snow burned into her memory, and the first real doubt she had felt in years taking root somewhere deep inside her chest. The following morning, Olivia arrived at Hartwell Manufacturing an hour before anyone else. The building was quiet, the hallways dim except for emergency lighting and the glow of exit signs. Her footsteps echoed against the polished floors as she made her way to the HR archive room, where physical copies of incident reports were stored in gray filing cabinets that lined the walls like soldiers standing at attention. She found Jack Miller's file easily enough. The termination paperwork sat on top, followed by the incident report that had triggered the entire process. As she read through it again under the harsh fluorescent lights, her frown deepened. The report was detailed, almost too detailed, with specific dates and times and witness statements from employees she vaguely recognized. But something about the formatting looked wrong. The margins were slightly off compared to standard company templates. The font spacing seemed inconsistent in certain sections, as if pieces had been cut and pasted from different documents. Olivia pulled up the digital version on her laptop and compared the two documents side by side. That was when she noticed the discrepancy. The original report in the system had been modified 3 days before she signed it. The editing history showed changes made by Kyle Jennings, a mid-level supervisor who had been with the company for 6 years. Kyle had requested Jack's termination multiple times over the past year, each time citing vague concerns about attitude and reliability. Each time, Olivia had denied the request due to insufficient documentation. But this report was different. This report had witnesses, timestamps, specific allegations that painted Jack as a dangerous liability. Except now she was beginning to suspect that none of it was real. She found Kyle in the break room later that morning, pouring coffee into a travel mug with the relaxed posture of someone who had absolutely nothing to worry about. He was a thin man with sharp features and eyes that always seemed to be calculating something. Olivia approached him with the folder tucked under her arm, keeping her expression carefully neutral. Kyle looked up and smiled. That was the first thing that struck her as wrong. He smiled like he already knew why she was there, like he had been expecting this conversation and had already prepared his defense. She asked him about the report, about the modifications in the system, about the witness statements that did not match the employees' actual work schedules. Kyle's smile never wavered. He told her that he had simply corrected some formatting errors, that the witnesses had asked him to submit their statements on their behalf because they were too busy to do it themselves, that everything was perfectly legitimate. When Olivia pressed harder, pointing out specific inconsistencies that could not be explained by simple formatting corrections, Kyle's expression shifted. The smile remained, but his eyes went cold. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so that no one passing by could hear, and reminded her that questioning a documented termination could reflect poorly on her own professional judgment. After all, she had signed the paperwork. If the report was flawed, what did that say about her oversight? The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Kyle was not just protecting himself. He was warning her to back off or risk being dragged down with him. Olivia left the break room without another word. Her hands were shaking slightly as she walked back to her office. The folder clutched against her chest. She had built her career on following procedures, on trusting the systems that were supposed to protect both employees and the company. But those systems had failed, and she had failed along with them. That evening, she found herself driving through a neighborhood she had never visited before. Jack Miller's address was in his personnel file, and some part of her needed to see where he lived, needed to understand the full weight of what had been done in her name. The apartment building was modest, a 3-story walk-up with brick walls stained by decades of harsh New England winters. Through a second-floor window, Olivia could see warm light and the flickering glow of a small Christmas tree decorated with what looked like handmade ornaments. She parked across the street and watched as Jack appeared in the window, carrying Emily in his arms. The little girl was already in her pajamas, her head resting on her father's shoulder as he swayed gently back and forth, probably singing her to sleep. Olivia sat in her car until the lights in that window went dark. She thought about her own apartment, empty except for furniture she had chosen to impress people who never actually visited. She thought about the career she had built by following rules and signing documents without asking uncomfortable questions. Jack Miller was not the enemy. He was a father trying to survive, and she had helped destroy his livelihood based on lies told by a man who smiled while he ruined people's lives. Tomorrow, she would find a way to fix this. Tonight, she let herself feel the full weight of her complicity, and she did not look away from it. 3 days before Christmas, Olivia found Jack at the community center, where he had picked up a temporary job helping with holiday food distribution. Volunteers moved around the gymnasium, sorting canned goods and packing boxes for families in need. Jack worked efficiently at a folding table, his hands steady as he assembled care packages with the same precision he had once applied to machine repairs at the factory. She waited until his shift ended, then approached him in the parking lot as snow began to fall again, fat flakes that caught the light from the street lamps and turned the world soft and quiet. He saw her coming and his expression hardened immediately, his body shifting into a defensive posture that broke her heart a little. She told him that she wanted to help. She explained that she had discovered serious problems with the report, that she believed he had been wrongfully terminated, that she was working to gather evidence and bring it to the company's leadership. She offered to provide financial assistance while the investigation proceeded. Nothing official, just a personal loan to help him and Emily get through the holidays. Jack listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Then, he told her no. He did not want her money. He did not want her pity. He did not want anything from the woman whose signature sat at the bottom of the letter that had upended his entire life. If she felt guilty, that was her burden to carry, not his problem to solve. He had survived worse than this. He had buried his wife when Emily was only 2 years old and rebuilt their lives from nothing. He would survive this too. What he would not do was accept charity from someone who was only offering it to ease her own conscience. Olivia tried to argue, tried to explain that this was not about guilt but about justice. But Jack cut her off with a raised hand. He told her that if she really wanted to help, She should do her job and fix the system that had allowed this to happen in the first place. Beyond that, he had nothing else to say to her. He turned and walked toward his car, an old sedan with rust spots on the wheel wells. Olivia watched him go, feeling the rejection settle into her bones like the winter cold. But Emily had other ideas. The little girl had been waiting in the car with a book. She had seen Olivia through the window and recognized her immediately. Before Jack could stop her, Emily had rolled down the window and was calling out an invitation, her voice bright with the uncomplicated friendliness of childhood. Would Miss Olivia like to come over for dinner? Daddy was making spaghetti, and there was always extra because Daddy always made too much. Jack's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, frustration, and finally, a weary resignation that suggested he had long ago learned that arguing with his daughter was pointless. Emily was already waving enthusiastically, her smile so genuine and hopeful that even Olivia felt herself soften despite the tension still hanging in the air between the adults. She should have said no. But Emily's invitation felt like a door opening just a crack, and Olivia was desperate enough to walk through it before it closed forever. Dinner was awkward at first. Jack moved around the small kitchen with efficient silence, boiling pasta and heating sauce from a jar, while Emily set the table with mismatched plates. Olivia stood uncertainly near the door, unsure whether she should offer to help or stay out of the way. Emily solved the problem by handing her a stack of napkins and pointing to the table with the authority of a child who had grown accustomed to being in charge of certain household tasks. The apartment was small but meticulously clean, every surface organized with the precision of someone who had learned to make the most of limited space. A few framed photographs sat on a bookshelf near the window. Jack with Emily as a baby, Jack with a woman who must have been Emily's mother, Emily's school pictures arranged in chronological order. Olivia noticed that the photos of Emily's mother stopped when Emily appeared to be about 2 years old. She did not ask about it. The spaghetti was simple but good, the sauce doctored with extra garlic and Italian herbs that Jack admitted he bought in bulk from a discount grocery store. Emily chattered throughout the meal, telling Olivia about her school, her friends, her favorite books. She talked about how her daddy could fix anything, absolutely anything, even the neighbor's broken television and the landlord's garbage disposal. She talked about how her daddy was going to open his own repair shop someday, how he had promised to teach her how to use tools when she was old enough. Jack shifted uncomfortably when Emily mentioned the repair shop dream. It was obviously something he had told her during better times, a hope he probably no longer believed was possible. After dinner, while Emily watched a Christmas movie in the living room, Olivia helped Jack wash dishes. Standing side by side at the sink, their arms occasionally brushing as they passed plates and bowls between them, she apologized again, not for offering help, but for not questioning the report before she signed it, for not doing her job well enough to prevent this from happening. Jack was quiet for a long moment, his hands still in the soapy water. Through the doorway, they could hear Emily singing along with the movie, her voice slightly off-key but full of joy. Finally, he told her that apologies were easy. Anyone could apologize. What mattered was what happened next. Olivia promised him that she would find the truth and expose it, even if it cost her career. She would not let Kyle get away with what he had done. Jack looked at her then, really looked at her for the first time since she had arrived. Whatever he saw in her expression must have satisfied something, because he nodded once and returned to the dishes without another word. When Olivia left that night, she stood at the door for a long moment, reluctant to step back out into the cold. Emily hugged her goodbye with the unself-conscious affection of a child who had not yet learned to guard her heart. Jack watched from the kitchen doorway, his expression still guarded but no longer hostile. Something had shifted during that simple meal, something Olivia could not quite name. She had arrived feeling guilty and left feeling something else entirely, something that felt dangerously like hope. The evidence was harder to find than Olivia had expected. Kyle had been careful, covering his tracks with the skill of someone who had done this before. But he had also been arrogant, confident that no one would bother to look too closely at a routine termination of a floor technician who had no power and no connections. His arrogance was his weakness. Olivia started by interviewing the witnesses listed in the report. 2 of them seemed genuinely confused, claiming they had never spoken to Kyle about Jack Miller and had no idea their names were attached to any incident documentation. They showed her their work schedules, proving they had been on different shifts during the alleged incidents. The 3rd witness, a young woman named Maria who worked in the shipping department, went pale when Olivia mentioned the report. After some gentle prodding, Maria admitted that Kyle had pressured her to sign a statement, implying that her own job would be at risk if she refused. It was enough to confirm Olivia's suspicions, but not enough to prove anything to the company's leadership. She needed harder evidence. She needed Kyle's own words condemning him. Kyle found her in the parking garage that evening, stepping out from behind a concrete pillar with a smile that made her skin crawl. He told her that he had heard she was asking questions, poking around in matters that did not concern her. He suggested, in the friendliest possible tone, that she might want to reconsider her priorities. It would be unfortunate, he continued, if people started to wonder why she was so interested in defending Jack Miller. It might look like favoritism. It might look like something more personal. The company frowned on that sort of thing, especially from HR directors who were supposed to maintain professional boundaries. Olivia understood the threat immediately. Kyle was laying the groundwork to destroy her reputation if she continued her investigation. He would twist her efforts to help Jack into something sordid. She told him nothing, kept her expression neutral, and walked to her car without looking back. But her hands were trembling as she gripped the steering wheel, and she sat in the garage for 20 minutes before she trusted herself to drive. That night, she returned to the office after everyone had gone home. Using her administrative access, she navigated to the security camera archives and began searching through footage from the days leading up to Jack's termination. The system was slow, the files massive, and she had to scroll through hours of mundane recordings. Her eyes burned from staring at the screen, but she refused to stop. Finally, just after 2 a.m, she found what she was looking for. The footage showed Kyle at his computer, clearly editing a document on screen. The timestamp matched the modification date she had found in Jack's file, but that was not the most damaging part. Later, in the same recording, Kyle was in the break room with 2 other supervisors. The audio was poor, but Olivia could make out enough of the conversation to understand what she was hearing. Kyle was bragging. He was telling his colleagues that he had finally gotten rid of Jack Miller, that the guy had been making him look bad for months, and now he did not have to worry about being shown up by some floor technician who thought he was smarter than everyone else. One of the other supervisors asked if Kyle was worried about getting caught. Kyle waved off the concern with casual confidence. Who was going to catch him? HR signed off on everything. The witnesses would keep their mouths shut. As far as the company knew, Jack Miller was exactly the troublemaker Kyle had described in his carefully fabricated report. Olivia copied the footage to a secure drive and left the building as the first gray light of dawn began to show on the horizon. She had her evidence. Now she needed to figure out how to use it without destroying herself in the process. The boardroom was silent as Olivia finished her presentation. She had laid out everything systematically: the falsified report, the coerced witness statements, the security footage of Kyle's confession. The company's senior leadership sat around the long mahogany table, their expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed anger. Several of them had worked with Kyle for years. Kyle sat at the far end of the table, his earlier confidence visibly crumbling with each piece of evidence Olivia presented. His face had gone pale, his hands gripping the arms of his chair so tightly that his knuckles showed white. But he was not finished yet. When Olivia stopped speaking, he launched his counterattack. He claimed that Olivia had a personal relationship with Jack Miller. He suggested that her investigation was motivated not by professional integrity but by inappropriate feelings for a terminated employee. He painted her as a woman who had lost her objectivity, who was willing to destroy a loyal supervisor's career to protect a man she had become romantically involved with. The accusations hung in the air like poison. Several of the executives exchanged glances, clearly uncertain who to believe. The video evidence was damning, but Kyle's counterattack had introduced doubt. She had prepared for many outcomes, but she had not expected Kyle to attack her character so directly. Before she could respond, the boardroom door opened. Jack Miller walked in, his daughter's hand clasped firmly in his. Emily had insisted on coming. She had heard her father talking on the phone about the meeting and had refused to be left behind. Jack had argued, had tried to explain that this was adult business, but Emily had inherited her mother's stubbornness, and in the end he had relented. The executives stared at the unexpected visitors. Kyle's expression flickered with something that might have been panic. Olivia felt her heart rate spike as Jack approached the table, Emily's small hand still wrapped around his fingers. He had not known about Kyle's accusations. He had come simply to speak on his own behalf, to tell his side of the story to the people who had the power to restore his career or let the injustice stand. But one look at Olivia's face told him that something had gone wrong. Kyle repeated his accusations, louder this time, pointing at Jack and Olivia as if their mere presence in the same room proved his claims. Jack listened with growing anger, his hands clenched at his sides, his jaw tight with the effort of controlling himself. But before he could respond, Emily tugged on his sleeve. The little girl had been quiet since entering the room, overwhelmed by the adult tension surrounding her. The big table, the serious faces, the raised voices had all combined to make her shrink against her father's leg. But now she looked up at her father with worried eyes and asked, in a voice that carried through the silent boardroom, why the angry man was saying mean things about Daddy's friend. Every adult in the room turned to look at the child. Emily shrank further against her father's leg, suddenly aware of all the attention focused on her. Jack put a protective hand on her shoulder and told her it was okay, that the grown-ups were just having a disagreement, that everything would be fine. But Emily was not finished. She looked at the executives with the clear-eyed honesty that only children possess, the inability to understand why truth should ever be complicated or hidden. She told them that her daddy was not a bad person. He worked really hard. He always helped people. Last week, he had stayed up all night fixing their neighbor's heater because the old lady could not afford to call a repair service and it was really cold outside. He never complained, even when things were hard. He just kept trying to make things better for everyone. She paused, her lower lip trembling slightly, and then added in a smaller voice, "Please, do not take my daddy's Christmas again." The silence that followed was absolute. Several executives looked away, visibly moved. One woman at the end of the table pressed her hand to her mouth. Even Kyle seemed momentarily stunned, his prepared attacks dissolving in the face of a child's simple plea for her father. Jack knelt beside Emily and hugged her, whispering that she had done nothing wrong, that he was proud of her, that she was the bravest girl he knew. When he stood again, his eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. He told the executives that he did not care what happened to his career. He could find another job. He had done it before, after his wife died, and he had to rebuild everything from scratch. But Olivia Grant had risked everything to uncover the truth, and she deserved better than to have her reputation destroyed by lies. If they were going to punish anyone for what had happened in this room, they should punish him for coming where he was not invited. She was just trying to do the right thing. The room remained silent for a long moment. Then the CEO, a gray-haired woman named Patricia Hartwell, who had built the company from nothing 40 years ago, spoke for the first time since the meeting began. She told Kyle to leave the room. When he started to protest, she repeated herself with a tone that left no room for argument. After Kyle left, Patricia turned to Olivia and asked if she could verify every claim she had made. Olivia said yes. Patricia nodded slowly, then looked at Jack and Emily still standing near the door, the little girl's face still wet with tears she was trying so hard not to shed. She told them they could stay. This concerned them too, and they had a right to hear what happened next. The investigation took less than a week. With Kyle's confession on video and 3 employees willing to testify about his coercion, the case was straightforward. Kyle Jennings was terminated immediately and faced potential criminal charges for fraud and falsification of company documents. His access to the building was revoked within hours of the board's decision. Jack Miller was reinstated with full back pay and an additional settlement for wrongful termination. The company also offered him a promotion to shift supervisor, a position that came with benefits, better hours, and enough salary to finally start saving for the repair shop he had always dreamed about. When they told him, he had to sit down because his legs had stopped working properly. Emily, sitting beside him, asked if this meant they could get a Christmas tree that was bigger than her. Olivia was cleared of any wrongdoing and commended for her integrity in pursuing the truth despite personal risk. Patricia Hartwell personally thanked her for upholding the values that the company was supposed to represent. But the CEO also asked her, privately, to maintain professional distance from Jack, at least until the publicity around the case had died down. The company could not afford even the appearance of impropriety. Olivia understood. She thanked Patricia for her support and returned to her office, where she sat alone for a long time, staring at the photograph on her desk of a younger version of herself accepting her HR certification. She had gotten into this field because she wanted to help people, because she believed that good systems and fair procedures could protect workers from exploitation and abuse. Somewhere along the way, she had forgotten that the job was supposed to be about more than just following procedures. It was supposed to be about people. Jack found her there an hour later, having talked his way past the receptionist with a combination of charm and stubbornness that Olivia was beginning to recognize as his default approach to obstacles. He stood in her doorway, looking almost shy, which was strange for a man who had faced down a boardroom full of executives without flinching. He thanked her, not just for clearing his name, but for believing him when no one else had any reason to. He thanked her for taking a risk that could have destroyed her career, for standing up against someone who had the power to hurt her, for not backing down when it would have been so much easier to walk away. He told her that he knew she had been asked to keep her distance, and he respected that. He understood how these things worked, but there was a tree lighting ceremony at the Hartford Town Green that evening, and Emily had specifically requested that Miss Olivia come watch with them. Emily had been very clear about this. She had made Jack promise to ask, and he had learned long ago that breaking promises to his daughter was not something he was willing to do. He smiled slightly and added that Emily could be very persistent when she wanted something. She got that from her mother. Olivia hesitated. Every professional instinct told her to decline, to maintain the boundaries that had been clearly established. But she thought about Emily's face in the boardroom, about the tears she had tried so hard not to cry, about the simple trust in a child who saw the world in terms of good people and bad people. Right and wrong. She said yes. The town green was crowded with families when Olivia arrived, bundled against the cold in her warmest coat and the burgundy scarf she had worn the night she first saw Jack at the Christmas market. Snow was falling gently, dusting the ground with fresh white powder that sparkled under the streetlights like something from a greeting card. Children ran between adults, laughing and throwing snowballs. The smell of hot cider and roasted nuts drifted from vendor carts stationed around the perimeter. She found Jack and Emily near the front of the crowd, close enough to see the massive tree that would soon blaze with thousands of lights. They had saved a spot for her, Emily bouncing on her toes to stay warm while Jack stood with his hands in his pockets, scanning the crowd until he spotted her approaching. Emily spotted her first and ran over, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward her father with the enthusiastic strength of a child on Christmas Eve. Miss Olivia was here, she announced to everyone within earshot. Miss Olivia had come to see the lights, just like she promised. Jack smiled when he saw her, a real smile that transformed his tired face into something younger and warmer. He looked different tonight, Olivia realized. The tension that had lived in his shoulders for weeks was finally beginning to ease. He stood straighter. He breathed easier. He looked like a man who had been given permission to hope again. They stood together as the mayor gave a short speech about community and hope and the spirit of the season. Emily bounced impatiently, waiting for the moment when the lights would come on, asking approximately every 30 seconds if it was time yet. When the countdown began, the whole crowd joining in, she grabbed both Jack's hand and Olivia's hand, pulling them closer together so they could share this moment as a unit. The tree blazed to life in a cascade of color, thousands of lights reflecting off the falling snow and turning the world into something magical. The crowd gasped and cheered. Emily laughed with pure joy, her face tilted up toward the glowing branches, her eyes reflecting the lights like stars. And then, in the chaos of the moment, she placed Olivia's hand into her father's palm and whispered something that made them both freeze. "Daddy smiles more with you." Olivia tried to pull her hand back, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. How easily this moment could be misinterpreted by anyone watching. She thought about Patricia's warning, about professional boundaries, about all the reasons this was a bad idea. But Jack held on gently, not forcing her to stay but making it clear that he did not want her to go. He told her that Emily was right. He had spent the last 3 years convinced that he had to do everything alone, that asking for help was weakness, that trusting people only led to disappointment. After his wife died, he had built walls around himself and Emily, determined to protect them both from ever being hurt again. But she had shown him something different. She had risked her career for a stranger, fought for the truth when it would have been easier to look away, and never asked for anything in return. He did not know what this was, he admitted. He did not know if it could become something more, or if it would end when the holidays were over and real life resumed with all its complications and difficulties. But he knew that he wanted to find out. He knew that walking away without trying would be a different kind of cowardice than the one he had been practicing for years. Olivia looked at him. At this stubborn, proud, impossibly decent man who had somehow become important to her in the span of 2 weeks. She thought about all the rules she had followed her entire career, all the boundaries she had maintained to protect herself from exactly this kind of complication. She thought about her empty apartment and her carefully organized life and the way she had convinced herself that professional success was enough to fill all the spaces where connection was supposed to live. Then she looked at Emily, who was watching them with barely concealed excitement, her small face full of hope and expectation, and the absolute certainty that everything would work out, because that was how stories were supposed to end. Olivia tightened her grip on Jack's hand and told him that she wanted to find out too. The lights sparkled overhead as snow continued to fall, covering the town green in a blanket of white. Jack pulled Emily into a hug that somehow included Olivia too, the 3 of them standing together in the glow of 1,000 Christmas lights while the crowd celebrated around them. It was not a fairy tale ending. There would be complications ahead, questions to answer, boundaries to negotiate. There would be conversations with HR and awkward explanations, and probably more than a few raised eyebrows from colleagues who had watched the whole situation unfold. But standing there in the cold with Jack's hand warm in hers and Emily's laughter ringing in her ears, Olivia felt something she had not experienced in years. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She felt like she had finally stopped following procedures long enough to find something real. And when Emily looked up at both of them with a smile that could have melted all the snow in Hartford, Olivia knew that whatever came next, she would not have to face it alone. None of them would.